Yo, what's going on? It's been a hot minute. There hasn't really been much news. There's been like slight nerfs to like pain and gain and impending victory and stuff as a general reduction of self healing, stuff like that. But nothing that's really been notable enough to talk about. But we actually have the War Within patch notes here, and there are changes here that are new. Like there's new shit in here. I mean, maybe there's changes that some of these things they've already made on the beta. Um, but these are new changes um in here that we should talk about, right? I've browsed them a little bit, but realistically, let's just go over all of them because, well, we like to yap here, right? We like to yap here. That's what we do. So let's go over the warrior section. All talent trees have had many talent locations moved and had their pathing updated. That happened. Here it is. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but I mean, these things change, but we're basically still taking the same shit. I mean, to be fair as well, we do actually have a couple, like we have like this hone reflexes and stuff. Like we have a couple flex points comparatively that we can put in like rumbling or a second stun with, excuse me, stormbolt, right? So we do have a couple flex points, and some of those flex points are basically like, hey man, you might have to take the, like if you're playing like Mountain Thane, you're taking like Thunderclap and Crackling Thunder potentially. But realistically, it's like, hey man, look, we got a couple flex points. The update's pretty decent. I Everybody was probably really hoping for a rework, more so than this, and this is just more of like a reshuffle and an update than like a big rework. But we've gone over that before. This honed reflex change is interesting. Most people didn't really take it. It reduced, I think it was what, pummel, overpower, and raging blow. Had one less second previously. This was changed to give your just a little more cooldown on your defensives and your kick. I mean, it's better than the old hone reflexes. The old hone reflexes wasn't very good because most of the time you got back charges through resets rather than a cooldown reduction. So having a bit better here, even with the slight amount of reduction in something like spell reflection, has potential for like Mythic Plus. It's just a little more defensive, so it's a nice defensive point. We still face the problem of we're not really ever going to be able to take endurance training if we're picking up any kind of throughput, which does kind of suck comparatively because previously with this, with our class tree, we were actually able to take a point or two into endurance training when it was down over here before they moved Shockwave and everything. So we're losing a little bit out on that, but overall, the changes are pretty decent. They updated Second Wind. While you're below 35% health, you restore 1% max health every second. The amount restored is increased the closer you are to death. It's just making Second Wind a little better. Initially, when I saw this and I saw Second Wind, I'm like, this is kind of... It felt kind of useless, honestly. But that's also because of the nature of what we were dealing with in Dragonflight, where if you were below basically 40% health, the next thing that hit you would kill you at all times. Essentially, like if you had close to below 50% health, right, you're just dead from the next mechanic. So with changes to this, with changes to reducing self-healing, stuff like that, hopefully with the stamina increase that they've talked about, that we aren't going to be dealing with as big of one-shots as we've been dealing with before, but it gives a little more value to Second Wind, so that's fine. They didn't nerf it what it was, they just made it a little better, so Berserker Rage is baseline. It's really nice for any kind of fear mechanic. Slam. So one of the reasons why slam damage was also increased is in the tree, Crushing Force does no longer buff slam. Arms no longer has improved slam. So they've just made slam generally a better button. Depending on the build, you might even have this on your bar for Fury if you're playing a build like, maybe not if you're playing a build like this with the changes they made. But realistically, there's a chance you could run out of like Raging Blow charges, so maybe you'll have Slam on your bar and it's a little buff there, but realistically, it's more of an arms thing. Blade Storm, damage increased by 70%. This is massive. This is very, very big. This is very, very strong. I'm assuming in AoE, we're probably going to be like Arms was already taking AoE and Blade Storm. Blade Storm in AoE, but now that it's buffed even for Fury, uh, obviously we use it for Slayer Fury a significant amount, so Blade Storm is a way, way better button. Ravager's damage is decreased a little bit. This is fine. Realistically, it's because, hey man, while Ravager is out, you can hit buttons. So if Ravager is too strong, then it makes this Blade Storm change pointless. So it's just a bit of an interchange here. Sudden Death can stack 2 times. We've seen this before. This is a very, very nice change, especially with how Slayer works. This is something we wanted with Season 3 Arms tier set, where you got a Sudden Death proc off of Ren ticks, and you could quite literally get a Sudden Death proc mid-cast before the buff is consumed, get another proc, and you just waste one of the procs. And that sucks. So having 2 stacks, which is what we've kind of been asking for a while, is good. Thunderclap, Rage reduced. Blood and Thunder is no longer there, so it just applies Rend. Frothing Berserker now refunds 10% and 25% for protection. So was this nerfed from previous? I don't remember. It might be a slight nerf because of the Rage economy stuff overall, but it might be. Shockwave no longer generates Rage. Champion Spear generates 10 Rage, was 20. Thunderous Roar no longer generates Rage on cast. This is new, however. I had not seen this before, but this is new. Thunderous Roar now deals reduced damage beyond 8 targets. The tooltip will reflect this change in a future update. Thunderous Roar was one of our best AoE buttons, especially in dungeons, especially with big pulls. So Thunderous Roar actually getting this is honestly a pretty significant nerf because it was uncapped previously. But with them buffing Blade Storm, with them buffing Odin's Fury for Fury, I can kind of see it because we were doing a lot of AoE damage, but I don't really think they needed to nerf Thunderous Roar, especially considering that this is more damaging for Arms than it is for Fury, and Arms is already behind a decent amount. This is also the new change for the War Within. Now Thunderous Roar, with Thunderous Words, makes enemies taking bleed damage take 30% more bleed damage while the Thunderous Roar buff is active on them. This is also new. Odin's Fury now deals damage reduced beyond 8 targets, the tooltip. Huh. They're actually nerfing Fury's AoE a decent amount. I don't think, like, a lot of Odin's Fury's damage is the bleed, though. So I don't know if it's going to affect it that much, considering the bleed is doing a lot and the bleed is applied, so the base, like, the static damage isn't going to be as high. But so I don't think the bleed is going to be nerfed. Maybe. Let's see. I am being told that this Odin's Fury change has just kind of been there already. So I checked to see if it was on here, but it wasn't. But maybe this has been there already. So maybe I'm just being dumb. So disregard this one. I guess the tooltip is just incorrect. Uproar. This is maybe one of the other reasons why they've nerfed Thunderous Roar to be worse in AoE with to have a soft cap on it is because of this Uproar change where we're going to have Thunderous Roar every 45 seconds. The thing that makes this important as well, or makes this very strong, is because Thunderous Roar will be 45 seconds, you'll also have a 45-second timer with Odin's Fury, which with their Thunderous Words and through Bloodborne is buffing the bleed you're getting out of Odin's Fury. So because you're buffing that bleed, what you're actually able to do in a window is now every 45 seconds you can Thunderous Roar and then Odin's Fury, which through Titan's Torment will also proc Avatar, which means every time you use Odin's Fury, the bleed will actually be affected by the Thunderous Words buff and by the 4 seconds of Avatar that you gain on top of the buff through Bloodborne. And it's going to do a ton of AoE damage, right? So one of the reasons why they may have um, capped Thunderous Words a bit by Thunderous Roar a bit by itself is just because of how much AoE damage we have, and this is without even counting Blades, taking Blade Storm, right? Where we at? Champions might now cause you to deal 25% increased crit damage to targets chained to your spear. This means you can use the spear, hit a target, and then not have to stand in it, which is nice. The other consequence of this, though, however, is they changed the math on it, so it's actually it's a little bit nerfed from what it previously was. I think it's like I think we lose like 0.25% on crit damage, if I remember Mr. Garms' math correctly. He did the math right. I just don't know if I'm remembering correctly, but we are getting that that thing a bit nerfed. Which is weird since most people don't like spear anyway, so nerfing it on top of it seems weird. Piercing Spear now increases all damage, was only the initial damage. I mean, still not worth taking. We do not have enough talent points to take Piercing Challenge on top of Champion's Might, realistically, with how we have to take everything else in this window. The visual for Shockwave has now properly updated. This is nice because it just means that we're actually able to... Using the spell means we're able to accurately see where the spell affects, because it's not a spell like, let's say, Heroic Leap, where you would click and then or you'd hit the button and then you'd click to see where you're leaping. It just goes. Now with the accurate visual, we can really get a feel for, okay, I can hit a target from this far away, I can get this group of mobs, I can do this here. Visual clarity is always going to be a massive benefit. Thunderous Roar visual been adjusted. A bug that made Rallying Cry increased max melt by 15, so 10%. Why is Rallying Cry not doubled to 20% in Mythic Plus yet? I do not know. They gave Demon Hunter Darkness that treatment, but they have not given it to Rally after nerfing it by over half previously. And Rally is still kind of down in the dumps. Right now, Rally is so mediocre. I mean, it's still decent, right? It's a button that you can press that helps you raid. It's still decent, but it is the same as like Resto Shaman, Ancestral, whatever, that they can just put on whoever they want at any time. And then there's Aug Evokers that can decide who gets 10% more health on a 1.5 minute cooldown instead of a 3 minute cooldown. So I really think they still need to fix Rally in Mythic Plus and maybe even honestly adjust it up a little bit to be more valuable in Raid, even though it is still a good button, especially when you combine it with other damage reductions to increase your effective health pool overall. Thunder Throw, nobody ever took it, nobody cared. I don't even know what Sonic Boom was, so it's gone, no, who cares? Blood and Thunder was removed, but the only reason people took Blood and Thunder most of the time was so they could have their Thunderclap spread rend if it was talented, and now that it just does that automatically, though we see Thunderclap now applies rend by default, Blood and Thunder is no longer needed, and it also just technically opens up a new talent point for us that we don't have to take. Going into arms, new talent, Finishing Blows. Generates 8 rage and used... Overpower generates 8 rage when used on a target below 35% health. This talent is not new. They took Strength of Arms, ripped it in half, and said one of the talents is new. They placed this talent within the... No, here's what we're going to do. It's going to do a new wellhead link. So anytime I try and do that calculator shit, it just doesn't work for me. So, and this is where improved Slam used to be, but now they just took Strength of Arms, which used to be over here as a choice node with improved Sweeping Strikes. Now Strength of Arms is here. It's still decent in single target, but they took it, ripped it in half, and put the other half here. Arms still does have some issues in execute, so with rage, so this is a possible help for that. Although, considering the addition of Sky Fury as the new raid buff that essentially gives the whole raid Wind Fury on top of a 2% mastery buff, now most warrior players will have a far easier access to that Wind Fury effect, meaning rage is not going to be nearly as problematic for the general player base, because you're not realistically going to be playing with a shaman at all times. But now, since it's a raid buff, or it was an enhancement shaman, now it's just any shaman, right? So that's good. Barbaric training has been redesigned for arms. Now dance 10% damage and 10% crit damage to Slam, Cleave, and Whirlwind. One of the major redesigns that they did with arms is making Cleave just a good button. Cleave replaces your Whirlwind. Cleave does a ton of damage. It has been buffed over and over and over again. Cleave now works with collateral damage. It works with Fervor of Battle. It works with Barbaric Training. It works with the multiple Cleave talents within Colossus. Cleave does a ton of damage now, and it's our go-to AoE button. Whereas previously, we were leveraging shit like Dreadnought, we were leveraging shit like Dreadnought, Martial Prowess stacks, Sword of Storm's Whirlwind that did a lot of damage, but it was a rage dump. Now, it's just, hey man, hit the cleave button, cleave good, which is helpful for especially even newer players, because the arms AoE issue was pretty wild. In all honesty, you had so many buttons to press. And the weirdest thing of all of them is your filler spell being Overpower, because Overpower was so strong and Dreadnought was so strong. Dreadnought was sometimes your #1 damage in dungeons if you used it correctly, which is, for a filler spell, fucking crazy. And for a single talent point, absolutely disgusting. Because one of the other additional changes they made is things like Battle Lord. They made Dreadnought a choice node here. And I think they also just reduced the base damage of Overpower in multiple areas through multiple talents, as well as it by itself, meaning that Dreadnought, because Dreadnought scales off of Overpower damage, isn't going to be as disgustingly strong as it was. So now, i.e., hey man, hit the cleave button. Dreadnought and Overpower buff cleave through Martial Prowess. Hey man, AoE, hit the cleave button. I think it's way better designed. They have removed Hurricane from both specs, and now we have Unhinged. Unhinged means every other time your Bladestorm Ravager hits, you automatically cast a Mortal Strike. For Fury, this is a Bloodthirst. This is just a really good change. One of the problems with Hurricane is just the ability for on-demand 30% strength amp is kind of insane. And depending on how you want to buff the class, it's entirely unbalanced, and it's not really fun to play around. So just removing Hurricane and now having actual options with your talents down here that are more interesting, I think is way, way better. So thank you very much for removing Hurricane. Now all we have to do is remove Test of Might, and we're cooking somewhere. Arms also needs some decent buffs. Although Arms could have been buffed in these talent points a little differently, I've been mainly focused on Fury, because Slayer Fury has been my main focus, really, because honestly it's just been the best. They did redesign Dance of Death. When an enemy dies affected by your Blade Storm, all damage you deal is increased by 5% for the remainder of Blade Storm and for 2 seconds afterwards. When an enemy dies while affected by your Ravager, its duration is extended by 2 seconds. These effects can trigger up to a maximum of 3 times per use of Blade Storm or Ravager. I'm honestly not sure how well this is going to fit in, because there's a lot of there's a decent amount of conditionals that apply to Dance of Death, and I think it has potential, right? But I'm not sure exactly how useful it's going to be, because talent points, especially capstone talent points, are very, very valuable, or should be very valuable. And if something does not do a significant amount more damage than you expect it to do, then it's just not going to ever be picked, and it's just going to be worse. Dance of Death was realistically never picked by Arms or Fury. When because there's Storm of Steel here, but Storm of Steel is different, actually, so don't mind that. But Dance of Death is something that I never took once in the entirety of Dragonflight. So trying to buff it, change it, maybe it's a little better. But we'll see if it has any use. Because like I said, these capstones are going to be very valuable. Not to mention, if you try to play Slayer Arms, playing Slayer Arms, your talent point economy, especially when it comes to these powerful talents here on the side, which you do not get access to these if you go through the middle to get Blade Storm. will be a bit more constrained. So we'll see how much value this talent point has potentially. Might be decent for AoE, especially considering how much more damage Blade Storm does now, but who knows? Blade Master's Torment has been redesigned. Activating Avatar grants 8 seconds of sweeping strikes, and while Avatar is active, the cooldown of Cleave is reduced by 1.5 seconds. This is just basically a big AoE button now. What it was previously is just hitting Avatar made you Blade Storm, which for Slayer would probably be decent, but with the buffs and they just kind of didn't like the way it was behaving, right? So they changed it. One thing that's interesting about Avatar granting 8 seconds of sweeping strikes is you can put that on top of improved sweeping strikes as an example. So improved sweeping strikes increases the duration of sweeping strikes by 6 seconds, and sweeping strikes by itself so this moves it up is 15 seconds plus 6 seconds brings it up to 21 plus the 8 seconds that you would get from the Blade Master's Torment means that your sweeping strikes, if you activate it and then press Avatar, you'll have almost 30 seconds of sweeping strikes, which sweeping strikes has a 30-second cooldown. So depending on the situation, if you're within a, if you're doing like, if for some reason there's some crazy 2-target boss, right? Out of a 60-second window, you're going to have, I think it's 50 seconds of sweeping strikes. And that's just kind of wild. I think I did them as I mathed it up. I think in like a 5-minute window, you have like an 80% uptime in sweeping strikes, which is crazy. But whether or not there's a situation where that's going to be useful, I don't know. Because right now, I don't really see a situation where ARMS is doing well or playing well. But maybe there might be additional changes in here that I'm not aware of that might make it more desirable to play. Because there are changes in here, like we said with the Thunderous Roar one, that are not currently known to us. So because of the stat squish and all that shit, all ability damage increased, execute damage increased, slam damage increased. Cleave now replaces Whirlwind if you have it talented, which is good. Cleave cooldown is reduced to 4.5 seconds, was 6. Previously, it was 3, which means that you could cleave every other global, especially if you picked Reaping Strikes, which is now gone, which was here. But now you are able to hit cleave every 3 globals, so as good. Cleave damage increased by 5%. This is not as significant of a buff as they had in the beta, I believe. But we have to consider the amount of things Cleave is getting on top of. If you're running this, right, Cleave is going to do 45% additional damage between these two talents if you're playing Colossus. So that's a lot. So if they buff Cleave too much, it's just going to be way too much damage, right? Overpowered damage increased by 55%. I feel the problem is I haven't followed ARMS closely enough, so I don't know exactly what's new or what's different with these. This is a decent amount of overpower damage. It also is going to translate to Dreadnought damage as well, like we talked about before. Rage generation reduced from auto attacks. This is just for the general rage economy thing that they have been talking about. Whirlwind damage reduced by 30% because they reduced the amount of cost of it by 30%. Ren 33%, ignore pain by half. This change actually is pretty interesting because now we're going to be able to get a full value ignore pain at 20 rage instead of 40, which means we're actually going to be able to use it a bit more regularly in our in combat, so it's not going to take up as much rage. And when we're not in the execute phase, on top of having the new Sky Theory buff, you actually sit at a decent amount of rage when you're playing Slayer and Colossus for ARMS. So Ignore Pain is definitely, I guess they're happy with having this in the ARMS repertoire. However, honestly, I'm not a fan of Ignore Pain. I don't like it very much, but if it's good, I'll use it. Battlelord no longer increases damage dealt by Overpower. Battlelord used to increase it by 35%, which it no longer does. Fervor Battle now also triggers Cleave. Silent Reverberation also triggers Cleave. Collateral damage applies to Cleave. Warlord's Torment got taken out back and killed with a shotgun. This talent is no longer worth taking, as far as I know, in almost any situation, because it is just terrible. You get 6 seconds of recklessness every minute and a half for a capstone talent point on this side of the tree. You are much better taking, I don't know, like 1 point in champion spear or even an uproar than you would be taking this talent ever. I really wish they would have redesigned it like they did Blade Masters if they didn't want it to increase rage generation, because 6 seconds, especially when it's not acting off a Colossus Smash, is just simply not fucking worth it. Um, this is a good change for In for the Kill. A lot of this is from the beta. We've talked about it before. Now In for the Kill is the same length as your blunt instruments, making it way more. It's just way nicer to have. Makes it a pretty good option. I think they're pretty close. Like In for the Kill and Test of Might are pretty close. I don't know which one's going to be better, but anything to kill Tom is good for us. I see they buffed Overpower. Um, and they nerfed Dreadnought damage because it was doing too much. So Overpower is more single target than it is AoE. Strength of Arms, remember this is a talent that they cut in half to give us finishing blows. Strength of Arms now also increases Overpower damage by 15%. I believe this is new, actually. So this is buffing Arms' single target a little more. Previously, it just had the 10% crit and 10% crit damage. I think this is new. So that's a little buff to Overpower there. Tactician nerfed, Deft Experience nerfed, Valor and Victory versatility buffed by 1%. Skull Splitter now has the Tides of Blood passive added to it, so now it's Deep Wounds and Rend. It's decent, but I still don't like Skull Splitter as a button. Now they give Ravager to Arms, which has potential, but you will only potentially play it as Colossus, since Slayer Arms needs Bladestorm. Bladestorm no longer generates Rage on cast, but that is fine because Bladestorm is going to be casting abilities for you through Unhinged, so that doesn't matter. And you're auto-attacking during Bladestorm. Anyway, Crushing Force now increases Mortal Strike damage and crit chance by 5% per point. We're going to be taking this anyway. Crushing Force is just a throughput talent in our base tree. Like many other talents, you just have to take it. Critical Thinking was buffed, and now it restores 10% of rage per execute per point. So now if you have 2 points in Critical Thinking over here, between this and Improved Execute, every time you cast Execute, it refunds 30% of the rage spent. So, I mean, that's a good amount of rage that you get to keep every time you cast the ability. And we'll see if this with Sky Fury with Finishing Blows, if it's necessary, is enough to keep Arms' rage in Execute at a relatively decent level without completely killing it. Because previously, or what we have been dealing with is Execute for Colossus has been pretty miserable, where you just don't have enough rage to be able to play the game the way you want to play, right? Warlord's Torment Tooltim update. Yep, just the nerf. It's awful. Tides of Blood, put in a Skull Splitter. Reaping Swings, which is here, which just reduced Cleave cooldown. And Hurricane. Thank God Hurricane is gone. All right, now on to Fury. Woo! Fury. Fury is currently my favorite way to play. Also, I should mention, after talking about these changes, I will be... That's why I have this build up here, because I just want to talk about what we might be playing in pre-patch. I'll also put the code for it down below. The problem is I don't actually know. I won't put the code for it down below because realistically, because this code already has points in Slayer's Dominance, assuming we were like level 71, we're not going to get. I believe we don't get any hero talents. So because of that, in pre-patch, I am just assuming this doesn't exist. And if I try and export a build, it's going to put this point in and not work. So that's why I won't have the, when I talk about the builds that we might be messing around with, that I won't have this here, right? It's a lot of yapping, man. A lot of yap. Yap. So they added new Powerful Enrage, and Rage duration increased by 1 second, and an additional 15% damage as a choice node with Frenzied Enrage, with the change to how... I don't know exactly how much it's going to affect us on pre-patch. I'm not really sure. But one of the reasons we're also getting a lot of our ability damage buffed, a lot of these buffs, is because that brain, you can work. It's because that with the reduction in overall secondary stats, uh, one of the reasons why this is a choice node is it means people can play Fury if they want to kind of slower. Once we get enough haste throughout the expansion, it's possible Powerful and Rage might take over Frenzied, but currently the 15% increased haste from Frenzied, considering right now on the beta on a level 80 character with like normal raid eye level, I'm only sitting at I think like 24% haste. So considering we're gonna get over 50% of our haste value from Frenzied and Rage and from Frenzy itself, this is between these two, this is 21%. This is almost my full value of haste through secondary stats in 2 talent points. It's very, very powerful. Having haste is very good. We're still going to be haste mastery. So Frenzied and Rage will probably still be the go-to for a while unless our secondary stats get out of hand, if I had to guess. So that's why we have Powerful and Rage. This is also just an option for people that want to play Fury slower, which I don't know why, but whatever. Hurricane replaced by Unhinged. We've already talked about that. Bye Hurricane. Die. Fury Warriors now learn defensive stance by default, so we don't have to waste a talent point there. That is good. All ability damage increased. Rampage damage increased. Bloodthirst. Odin's Fury. This Odin's Fury buff is... I'm not sure exactly how much it is, because previously in the beta, they had a pass and they increased Odin's Fury damage by, I think what, it was like 133%? And this only shows 33%. That's probably also, this is not accounting for the ability damage increase. I don't know the math too well, so I can't be like when I look at it, I can go calculate it, right? I can go, oh, well, 1.49, which is the new ability scaling, times that by 0.33, and then plus that by 1.49, and hey, 1.98. So Odin's Sphere is technically like almost 100% better, kind of. I don't know if the math worked out correctly that way. Maybe that's how it works. I don't think so. You would need someone more mathy than me to tell you. But Odin's Fury is going to be doing a ton of damage, because that's also Odin's Fury doing damage, not including the Thunderous Words change and the Bloodborne change, which makes it well, not Bloodborne didn't get changed, but the Thunderous Words change does buff Odin's Fury by quite a bit. Raging Blow damage increased. Improved Raging Blow now is 25% from 20. So now with Raging Blow and Wrath and Fury, now your Raging Blow has a 35% chance to instantly reset its own cooldown. I don't know if that's going to be enough, which is why I still have Hack and Slash in here. But if this is enough, then you can take the point of the Hack and Slash and put it into like Vicious Contempt. This change is very, very massive, though. Reckless Abandon now buffs Bloodthirst and Raging Blow. They did nerf the amount of bonus damage you get, because it was it wasn't very. I mean, we weren't like Arcane Mage out of pocket, right? But it was doing a lot of damage, so they wanted to change the damage spread on that. So you're essentially, every time you rampage, you're going to be using a Bloodbath and a Crushing Blow, and it's quite good. Also. Also with the secondary stat squish, the fact that all of our ability damage increase, you might look at that and go, oh, wow, that's crazy. But considering the fact that with secondary stats going down, instead of having 60% mastery, which means I do 60% more damage while enraged, I have like 20%. So I'm kind of already getting, you're kind of already getting that base nerf, and it's being made up through the base changes instead. Deft Experience was changed, so now it extends your Enrage effect if you're already Enrage. It shows Deft Experience down here, and it talks about it's increasing its chance. I don't know if this might be new. Instead, increases Bloodthirst's chance to trigger Enrage by 2% per point. It doesn't show that on these talents here, but this might be a new addition to make Deft Experience a little better. So now they've also changed. No, this just goes with the change, so that while you have improved Raging Blow, it's now 35%. They removed the rage cost from Slam. I did talk about Slam a bit earlier. It is possible we might run out of charges in some very specific situations, and because of that, I still think it's probably going to be worth having Slam on your bar. You might only press it once or twice, but it's better to have something to press in a GCD than having nothing to press, right? And considering how much damage it will do because of how much they buffed it, and using it instead of something like Whirlwind, it'll just be a better little single target option filler in case something like that happens. Tenderize no longer increases the duration of rage. Blood Craze now triggers from Raging Blow instead of Bloodthirst. That is a change they made so that while you're using Crushing Blows or Raging Blows, you're increasing your Bloodthirst crit chance, which means that we just basically we have like the tier set that we have just kind of innate in our kit now, and it procs off of Raging Blow instead of Rampage Cast for Bloodthirst crit. Doesn't increase the damage, just the crit chance. But that does make us tankier through Cold Steel Hot Blood and allows us to use that talent, which also is buffed through Bloodborne, so yada yada yada. Bleeds good. Bleeds buff through Thunderous Roar. Haha, bleeds good. Bladestorm is now a choice node with Ravager. All Ravager talents have been worked with Ravager and Bladestorm. So now Unhinged just casts Bloodthirst for us, and Storm of Steel. I don't really know if this is going to be useful. I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you. But Unhinged is pretty good, so we're probably just going to be running that. They did nerf the shit out of Unbridled Ferocity. This talent used to be 20%, it is now 6%, and it kind of sucks now. One thing I find really weird is that even though they nerfed the shit out of it, Depths of Insanity is still just way worse than Unbridled Ferocity. So I'm surprised they didn't try to rework Depths of Insanity or just make this talent selection better. But instead of that, now we're doing weird shit like this where we don't take it and we take a point like Odin's Fury. But with the changes, maybe... Oh, but Odin's Fury is just good button now, especially in AoE. Didn't change Berserker's Torment, didn't change Titan's Torment. Frenzied Flurry has been removed. It was down here, but they just put it inside Single-Minded Fury, which I wish would die and would go away. There's no reason to have this here. Just let people transmog shit. Who gives a fuck? And this entire part here, which was Raging Armaments, Annihilator, Sword of Storms, all got chopped out, and then Onslaught was moved over here. Oh, fuck, that was a lot of yapping, man. A lot of yap today. A lot of yapping. I don't know much about procs, so I'm not going to talk about it, but this is the main changes that happened with us. This is what we're looking for going into the PTR. We're going into the pre-patch. There is speculation. I don't know if they're removing or nerfing tier sets. I don't think they are. So there is some speculation of people maybe using the old tier set to buff Odin's Fury even more with the 50%. But I'm just going to keep using the current tier set. We're just going to get a lot more Bloodthirst crits, so who cares? But with the changes to Reckless Abandon, this is kind of what I've been looking at for a single target. It is possible you don't need this talent Hack and Slash and can keep it in Vicious Contempt for additional damage. Most of this is just going to be for re-clears or whatever. This is mainly focused on, yeah, you have single target, but you have a little bit of AoE. You have good single target damage, but you have AoE with Odin's Fury. If you need to take more AoE, you can just go over here and take... like if there's a little bit of AoE, you can do something like this instead, right? The reason why we're not taking sudden death is because I don't think we're getting Slayer's dominance. And the other thing about Slayer's dominance is you don't gain a sudden death without this talent point. So even if we have this, it's like, it's okay. But just buffing Raging Blow even more is probably going to be better. So 50% more damage is going to be better than that, especially with the damage amp we're getting through Reckless Abandon. You can just swap these talent points around if you're doing either single target or AoE. I think this build will fit most people. If you feel like you're running out of Raging Blow charges, like I said, take a point out of Vicious Consent, put it in Hack and Slash, and you should be with the 35% on top of the 25% per Rampage hit, be totally chilling. I think for pure single target, if there is 0 AoE in the fight, so for example, if there's no reason to cast Odin's Fury, I can see a situation where instead we're going down into Onslaught. If we're using Onslaught, because it has a lesser cooldown, we might not need something like Hack and Slash, or we might not need something like Wrath and Fury, and we could take Tenderize instead to buff Rampage through Slaughtering Strikes. But realistically, this is kind of a float point. You can do whatever. If we're taking Onslaught, we're probably taking Tenderize, because just buffing Rampage by 60% is really good, especially considering we did get Rampage-specific buffs here on top of the ability damage, so Rampage is going to do a good amount. But this is kind of what you're looking at. If we're not taking uh, Titan's Torment, because if we're not running Odin's Fury, for example, you can probably take like Uproar, or you can take Champion Spear if you want. Realistically, we're probably just going to be throwing an Uproar. Berserker's Torment is okay. I'm not too big of a fan of it. I think Titan Torment is just way better if we're running that, and if we're running it in AoE, it's better. But if we're talking about like big AoE as an example, we can run Titan's Torment here. We will be moving over to Bladestorm with the Bladestorm buff, and then you don't necessarily need, like, you can just go Anger Management and run with this. You don't necessarily need Titanic Rage, but like I said, if you aren't really running out of Raging Blow charges, you can take that extra point, throw it into Titanic Rage. It's just nice to have, especially when you're running AoE, auto enrages you, that kind of thing. Um, but this is maybe what we're looking at for AoE, just because Bladestorm does a ton of damage. You can just mav Bladestorm with your Recklessness every single time, and it's going to do a bunch damage. Bladestorm, because it's buffed by 70%, is going to do a crazy amount of damage, right? It is a very good button. But outside of maybe like a council fight, I don't really see why we would be running something like this, you know? Um, which is just heavy AoE. So realistically, most of the time, we're just going to be running something like this, you know? Just because it's got single target, it's got AoE, we'll be chilling, it'll be good. And that's kind of it. There's not too much more to talk about. As far as like what I'm thinking. But realistically, this is kind of what we're looking at. It is possible, like I said, that if we go heavy AoE, do the Bladestorm thing. But otherwise, instead of talking in circles, I will end the video now, because it has been 45 fucking minutes. Oh my god. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy Prepatch. There's some fun little events and stuff to get. Otherwise, see New War Within. Bye-bye.